honored rabbis, and my uncle, Mr. Pennant, who is like a brother to my father. You know, we talk so much about heroes in today's culture, and so much of what we read about are heroes, and the heroes of our generation and the heroes of today. And I just wanted to tell you a story about my hero, and the hero who was my father, Oscar Heller. My brother started to talk about the heroic act that he performed in Dachau by saving someone's life, and he was actually interviewed. And I wanted to tell the story in his words so that we didn't miss any of the details that come straight from his mouth. So I'm going to read the article that was published in a local newspaper in Brooklyn. And the story really made its way far and wide, many countries, many states. In my father's words, in October 1944, at the age of 13, after 5 months in Auschwitz, I was transferred to Dachau, where I was assigned to camp number 4. For some reason, because I was the only young boy in the entire camp, I found favor with the SS officer in charge of food supplies and services for both prisoners and guards. So I was assigned to the kitchen. My job was to stand at the kitchen gate all day and to shout, "Achtung," when this SS officer entered for his periodic inspection of the kitchen. Upon hearing my shout, all prisoners' staff in the kitchen were to stand at attention until the officer announced, "Weitermachen," which means carry on, at which time everybody resumed working. I was lucky since he liked my sharp, boyish voice and always gave me a satisfied look when he heard me shout, "Achtung," to announce his arrival. Being in the kitchen staff meant that I had access to food, which was a life-saving privilege not only for me, but for others. I was constantly besieged by prisoners, begging for any scraps of food I could get for them. I took what I could and was able to help keep many, many people alive. Many of those people survived only because of this kitchen job that I was lucky to get. One middle-aged prisoner approached me, calling me Kicsi, which means small one in Hungarian, which was my nickname in camp. He told me his name was Shmuel Farbenblum, and he was a barrack chief in the camp, and he had a 15-year-old son, Tzvi, who was in the infirmary barrack and had just survived typhus but was now starving to death. He told me I must give him a pot of heavy soup every day to keep his son alive. A pot? I begged him to leave me alone. I told him I was handing out too much stolen food left and right, and if I took any more risks, I would be caught and punished. He did not accept my answer. He waited until I finished work for the day, grabbed me, and pulled me to the barrack, and he said, "Just see my son. You must see my son." We entered the barrack where his son was lying on a heap of straw. He had a long body with no flesh, only skin and bones. He was very weak and sick and couldn't open his eyes. I was just past my 14th birthday, and one can appreciate that I had not yet developed a father-son feeling. I asked Mr. Farbenblum, "You are a barrack chief. Why don't you do what other barrack chiefs do? Take off part of the food ration of each person in your barrack and feed your son." He replied that he could not do that. He would not steal from prisoners even a tiny bit of food that was allotted to them that would possibly keep them alive. I said, "Not even to save your own son?" He replied firmly, "Not even for that." Whereas if I stole food, it would not decrease the portions of the other prisoners. I was so moved by Shmuel Farbenblum's refusal to take food from the mouths of starving prisoners that I told him to pick up a pot of soup every day, and so he did. Within a couple of months, the Americans arrived. Camp 4 was evacuated. I was transferred to the main camp, and Tzvi was transferred to another camp, and we lost touch. 2 years later, walking on the street, I saw a very handsome man cross the street, a middle-aged man and a young, handsome fellow, and we stopped and we looked at each other. And we quickly crossed the street, and the older man asked me, "Young man, were you in Dachau during the war, in Camp 4? "Yes," I replied. At that point, Mr. Farbenblum fell on me, embracing me and kissing me, pointing to his son Tzvi, all the while saying, "This is my son. You kept him alive." I was then 16 years old, but this encounter left an indelible mark in my memory. We then lost touch. And for many years while we were growing up, my father would tell us this story. And amongst the children we knew that and he had heard that Farbenblum had moved to Australia. And somehow they lost touch and he could never find this Farbenblum, who for us was just a name we heard all the time. Farbenblum, the guy who I saved his life in Dachau. About 15 years ago, while we were still living in Englewood, friends of ours, the Greenblatts, were making a Shabbat bar mitzvah, and they asked me if I could house their cousins from Australia, the Farkash family. And Friday, they arrived, and they were in my house, and as always, an hour before Shabbat, I was on the phone with my parents, in-laws, to call to say Shabbat Shalom. And I said, and by the way, Dad, there's a very nice man staying here for the weekend who's from Australia. So my father said, ask him if he knows Farbenblum. So I look at this guy and I said, do you know somebody named Shmuel Farbenblum, Tzvi Farbenblum? And he turned white as a sheet and he said, nobody knows that that's his name. He's my neighbor, he's one of my best friends. I sit next to him in shul, and the only thing is, he changed his name when he moved to Australia. His name is Sam Moss, and if you didn't know, nobody knows his name is Farbenblum. And I went back to the phone, I said, Dad, I think we found Farbenblum. And the next week, Sam Moss called my father, and he came into America the following month, and they had a reunion, and they became like brothers, just like brothers. And Sam passed away a few years ago, but they had an incredible bond. But there's something that my father says. When he was interviewed, and he said, perhaps Sam Moss owes me some gratitude for keeping him alive, but I owe his father even more gratitude for giving me the merit of preserving a life. And that was the way my father saw life, always in the context of mitzvot, of good deeds. What can I do, as my brother said and my sister said. The one thing he always said was that he was cheated of performing the greatest mitzvah, of kibbud av v'em, caring for your aged parents. And he said that because of the Holocaust, Hitler cheated him out of taking care of his parents, that they did not grow old and he could not care for them and perform that mitzvah. And we knew that that was so important to him. And there's one person here who absolutely personifies kibbud av v'em. That's my sister. Bela Dad had very high standards. If we got a 99, he said, why don't we get 100? He wanted everything perfect. He loved right angles. He loved a neat house. He loved Mommy's chicken soup. And I believe that even with his high standards, you have risen and you have performed kibbud av v'em with a tremendous amount of sensitivity and love and devotion and passion to both our mother and our father. Mom, I do remember something the Dad said at Grandpa's funeral. And again, this was in the spirit of kibbud av v'em. He said to Grandpa, don't worry, we will take care of Grandma. And we are here for you, Mom, in that spirit. Dad, I hope that I didn't disappoint. Love you, we'll miss you. Everything we do, we'll be keeping you in mind. And I will make sure. And I always hear your voice. His voice was, he always said, didn't it occur to you? Didn't it occur to you to set the table nicely? Didn't it occur to you to put the milk in the refrigerator? Dad, I will hope and try that everything will occur to me in your spirit. Carry on your legacy. Love you. We'll miss you every day.